In early February 2026, global energy markets were remarkably quiet. A barrel of crude oil sat at a steady $69, keeping global supply chains humming along without a hitch. That affordable baseline is the lifeblood of the South African economy. It keeps tractors running on commercial farms, and it fuels the vast network of minibus taxis that millions of working-class commuters rely on every single day. Then, on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a sudden, coordinated military strike on Iran, killing the country's supreme leader. That isolated military operation instantly fractured the global energy baseline. It created a massive economic shockwave that swept across an entire continent that had absolutely nothing to do with the conflict. Within weeks, physical supply chains buckled. Paralyzing fuel shortages emerged at filling stations across Kenya, Ethiopia, and Zambia, completely halting local commerce in its tracks. South Sudan, a nation that generates 96% of its electricity from oil, was forced to begin rationing power, plunging its capital into rolling blackouts. Down in South Africa, wholesale diesel prices surged, with a further 10 rand per liter increase looming over the country, a cost that threatens to cripple low-income households. Not a single African government was consulted about the February 28th strike. The African Union did not get a vote, nor a seat at the table. We have to ask how a geopolitical decision drafted in Washington and Tel Aviv manages to directly drain the bank accounts of consumers living 4,000 miles away. To trace the shockwave back to its source, we have to look at the sequence of events. The regional escalation traces back to the sustained military bombardment of Gaza. That campaign prompted Houthi forces to begin attacking Red Sea shipping in late 2023. The resulting tensions and proxy engagements eventually escalated into the direct U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. This map shows the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway Iran closed in direct retaliation to the strikes. This single choke point handles roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply and up to a third of its global fertilizer trade. The moment those ships stopped moving, the math took over. Global oil prices surged past $100, peaking at $126 a barrel. The International Energy Agency labeled it the worst energy shock on record. The Strait of Hormuz remained fully operational until late February. This blockade was the direct, inevitable result of choosing military escalation over a diplomatic path. That global price shock didn't stay in the Middle East. It landed squarely on the desk of the South African National Treasury. To shield consumers from the spike, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwanga had to cut the local fuel levy by 3 rand a liter. That one-month intervention burned roughly 6 billion rand from the public fiscus. But the financial drain at the pump is only the first phase. South Africa imports approximately 80% of its agricultural fertilizer, accounting for almost a third of farming input costs. With urea prices spiking and planting seasons approaching across East and Southern Africa, an energy bottleneck is rapidly mutating into a continent-wide food security crisis. The families who will face food shortages later this year don't live in Washington. The bill for Western military action is being paid by the poorest households in the global South. The events of 2026 expose a harsh reality about the limits of African autonomy. The continent's economic sovereignty is essentially being held hostage. The ability to keep regional hospitals lit, freight trucks moving, and grocery shelves stocked relies heavily on the decisions of foreign governments, who are completely unaccountable to African voters. This map shows how the old model of Gulf-reliant, import-dependent energy security actually works in practice. As soon as a conflict breaks out, those maritime lifelines snap. The model is fatally flawed. Chronic dependence on imported fuel and fertilizer has become an active, ongoing threat to African national security. In the immediate term, African governments have a clear diplomatic mandate: leverage the African Union, BRICS, and the UN to demand an immediate ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But long-term survival requires breaking the dependency loop. Africa holds massive offshore reserves, spanning Mozambique, Namibia, Senegal, Nigeria, and South Africa. Extracting isn't enough. We must build localized infrastructure to refine and distribute fuels domestically, insulating economies from global shocks. The conflict in Iran is not Africa's war. African nations didn't start this geopolitical fire. But aggressively building true domestic energy sovereignty is the only way to ensure their citizens never have to pay for someone else's war again.